The hearing of the Foreign Affairs Committee will come to order. Thank you all for coming, and I do want to note the presence of Congressman Adam Schiff, who is not now a member of the committee, but has been for a number of years and is a active member of the Judiciary Committee with great interest in some of the issues we'll be discussing, and a fellow Californian, and we appreciate his interest in this issue. And without objection, he may participate in the hearing and be able to ask questions of the witnesses. I'd like to start off by thanking everyone who traveled here today to help sink the copyright pirates who plunder our country's creative wealth. The theft of intellectual property, or IP, has plagued America's entertainment industry for many years. Just this week, a month before its release, the film Wolverine was downloaded over the internet hundreds of thousands of times. IP piracy has now become an issue for a broad cross-section of the U.S. economy, for companies big and small in places far from Hollywood, Nashville, and Broadway. While the House Foreign Affairs Committee has always delved into matters of global economics and trade, this hearing marks the start of a concerted effort to capitalize on opportunities that are unique to this committee. Through our oversight of international programs, travel, and long-standing relationships with policymakers from other countries around the world, we plan to work more closely with other governments to provide the resources, the training, the legal guidance, and tools which they need to alleviate the international piracy that is so devastating to American ingenuity and American jobs. According to the International Intellectual Property Alliance, copyright infringement in 43 countries caused an estimated $18.3 billion in trade losses in 2007. The Motion Picture Association of America noted that the film industry lost $6.1 billion in 2005 due to motion picture piracy. The music industry estimates over 40 billion illegal downloads in 2008. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce found that trade in counterfeited goods is responsible for the loss of 750,000 American jobs per year. We just spent billions of dollars on a stimulus package to provide jobs to millions of unemployed Americans. And if we merely focused on curtailing piracy and counterfeiting, we would preserve almost 1 million jobs. IP protection is an economic stimulus. To help boost our economy, it is imperative we take measures to ensure American innovations are protected abroad and artistic communities can earn a return on their investment in new expression. This hearing is particularly timely as the Office of the United States Trade Representative will soon release the Special 301 report. This report lists specific countries whose lack of IP protection have the greatest adverse effects on the United States intellectual property industries. Among them, Russia, China, and India. The types of piracy occurring abroad range from selling DVDs on street corners to mass productions of optical discs and unauthorized reproductions distributed via the internet. By way of example, even though Russian law enforcement officials have increased the number of raids against warehouses storing pirated material, the number of criminal enforcement actions in the physical as well as online environment falls far short of what is necessary to address the problem. While Russia did shut down the website allofmp3.com, which sold business without rights holders' authorization, it became a game of whack-a-mole, as almost immediately several others took its place. In addition, Russia has yet to certify a legitimate collecting rights society, which, if it finally happens, will help performers get paid. Russia needs to live up to the intellectual property rights agreement it made with the United States in November of 2006, especially if it would like to be considered ready to join the World Trade Organization. While Russia has failed to enforce intellectual property rights sufficiently, China has chosen to enforce them selectively. Through the Summer Olympics in China, there were few, if any, counterfeit Olympic T-shirts to be found in the street stalls. NBC found that only 1% of online viewing by Americans occurred on copyright infringing sites. This proved that it is possible for Beijing to combat piracy when it wants to, when the eyes of the world are on China. Estimates from the U.S. copyright industry show that 85 to 90% of their members' copyrighted works sold in China in 2007 were pirated. Internet piracy is rampant in China and increasing as more Chinese are going online. In fact, the leading Chinese search engine for audio files, Baidu, offers links for downloading or streaming unauthorized copyright material. According to a recent article in Forbes, the number of copyright infringing videos on Chinese user-generated sites jumped more than sixfold between September 2007 and September 2008. China must demonstrate the will and the way to deal with piracy. As the desire for American content reaches new audiences overseas, pirates are becoming more sophisticated and daring. In particular, we're disturbed by the rise of signal piracy in the Philippines and alarmed by pirates in Thailand who have established their own movie channels. These modern-day Thai pirates of the air are beaming unauthorized programming to millions around the region. Clearly, these types of piracy don't need to be occurring in big countries to have a devastating impact on the American economy. The Bahamas currently maintains a provision in its copyright law that allows local cable operators to downlink, retransmit, and profit from U.S. copyrighted works without authorization from the copyright holder. This practice sets a dangerous precedent for the protection of U.S. audiovisual works throughout the Caribbean and Latin America. Even countries not on the priority watch list engage in unprecedented levels of piracy. Spain remains a hub of internet piracy. Mexico has more than 80 well-organized black markets selling pirated goods. Moreover, Mexico has the most prolific camcorder piracy problem in Latin America, as Mexican law doesn't protect against the recording of motion pictures in theaters. Speaking of lack of laws, we still need Canada to take a meaningful step to updating its copyright laws to come into compliance with the World Intellectual Property Organization Internet treaties. Intellectual property piracy is truly a global problem that harms not only U.S. industry, but has economic implications for other countries developing and supporting their own entertainment industries. India ought to appreciate the need to address IP protection. Its own homegrown entertainment industry, Bollywood, is subject to many of the same concerns that plague Hollywood. We need to do better at protecting Bollywood films when pirated copies are sold in mom-and-pop shops here in the U.S. And as evident with the crossover success and number of pirated copies of Slumdog Millionaire viewed in India, India needs to enforce adequate protections for multinational innovation as well. The United States and its trading partners rely heavily on investments in intellectual property to drive our economies. Unfortunately, the incentives and profits for engaging in piracy are high, and the risks of being apprehended and sanctioned are low in many of the countries around the world. The Center for Global Risk and Security at the RAND Corporation released a report in March documenting a link between piracy, organized crime, and funding of terrorist activities. Piracy of copyrighted materials is not a victimless crime, and its global repercussions must be addressed. I plan to introduce legislation shortly that will begin to elevate the attention given to intellectual property concerns abroad. We hope to hear from our distinguished panel of witnesses today about the real impact of piracy on their businesses and what mechanisms we can implement to protect American intellectual property internationally. And now my pleasure to recognize someone who came a very long way for this hearing, and we are very grateful. She gets the prize for many things, but she is the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. She's a good friend, and we're really excited. She came to Van Nuys, California for this hearing, our ranking member, Ileana Ross-Layton, and for any opening remarks that she might have.
Thank you so much, Howard. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor to be here in your area and to have our California colleagues as well. Our districts have a symbiotic relationship because your constituents make their livelihoods here, so it's in my interest to make sure that they continue to have a strong economy, because then they take their money to my district in South Beach and spend it. So we want them to continue to make money so they can come to Florida and stimulate our economy. Now, my husband is a lawyer who always lectures me at the end of the week about what Congress is doing, meddling in all these issues for which we have no jurisdiction. But in this case, and he made sure that I had this with me, the Constitution of the United States, our founding fathers, Article 1, Section 8. The Congress shall have the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. So copyrights and patents, and this issue from our founding fathers to the front pages of today's papers, when we look at the piracy that was going on and continues to go on in Wolverine and other movies and music, etc., is still fitting from way back when to just today. And I'm so glad that you have made sure that our committee has had a long-standing interest in this worldwide problem and its broad impact on our U.S. interests, including our national security. A prominent example of the committee's work was the hearing in 2003 at which senior officials from Homeland Security and Interpol testified that violent militants, including Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and Hezbollah, were in fact enriching themselves from intellectual property piracy and their proceeds in order to fund their activities around the world. According to the Secretary General of Interpol, quote, intellectual property crime is becoming the preferred method of funding for a number of terrorist groups. There are enough examples now of the funding of terrorist groups in this way for us to worry about the threat to public safety, end quote. And as you pointed out, many people believe that the piracy of intellectual property, including their own illegal copying of music, movies, and software, or their purchasing of bootleg copies, is close to being a victimless crime with only a minor cost to large and wealthy corporations. But there are, in fact, real victims in these so-called victimless crimes, and I'm so glad that you have been so involved in international economic infringement for many years. As our economy has moved from one of traditional manufacturing to one that is knowledge-based, the protection of intellectual property rights has become increasingly important to our country's prosperity. It is definitely a cause for concern to the increasing number of Americans whose livelihoods depend on these industries. In '96, the International Intellectual Property Alliance, which you had quoted, estimated that U.S. businesses lost more than $6 billion to copyright pirates in other countries, with China accounting for 1/3 of the total. The problem was enormous then, but it has grown rapidly since. U.S. companies lost last year, as you pointed out, more than $20 billion due to copyright infringement around the world. It's an annual theft of tens of billions of dollars is manifested in the loss of countless jobs, major reduction in tax revenues. And the problem is a global one, and there are few countries where it does not occur, sadly including our own. But the great bulk of the problem occurs in relatively few countries. The principal blame falls upon the criminals and those who do the dirty work, but their ability to operate requires the tolerance of national and local governments. So protection from law enforcement officials is often secured through corruption funded by large profits from these criminal activities. But widespread corruption is only is not the only obstacle. The biggest problem is that many of these foreign governments view this issue as being of little concern to them and see the costs as being largely borne by others. Thus, they have little incentive to do more than the minimum needed to keep the U.S. and other countries reasonably satisfied that they are in fact doing something. And this lax attitude makes much of our effort to deal with this problem ineffective. While they are confronted with evidence that their citizens are engaged in illegal activities and are reminded that their international agreements require them to take action to stop it, foreign governments are prone to make empty pledges that they will do more in the future and they believe that then we will go away. So new measures are often agreed to, promises are made, and yet somehow the problem is never fully resolved. So any policy that relies on securing new agreements or fresh promises is unlikely to solve the problem. That's the case in China, the worst violator in intellectual property rights. The U.S. government has repeatedly asked Chinese authorities to take action, and we have been repeatedly told that they're doing the best they can. But too little is being done, and that is by choice. China's largest internet search company automatically asks anyone who logs onto its site if they want to link to a wide array of known music piracy sites. And it's actually pushing piracy. It's a legitimate company operating openly in China. Baidu. The Chinese authorities are well aware of this problem. They could shut it down with a phone call. But they knowingly decided to do nothing to address our complaints because they have decided to pursue a policy in which Baidu and other Chinese companies will become global players in this industry. The Chinese authorities have invested enormous resources into censoring anything on the web that dares to mention democracy, that dares to mention the Falun Gong or any other subject that the regime wants to suppress. Many people have actually gone to jail for simply exercising their views, yet Chinese officials make the absurd claim that there is nothing more that they can do regarding online intellectual property piracy. That is outright theft made possible by government policy, and China is not the only country where this occurs. The root of the problem is worldwide, and it is that for many governments, the costs of doing nothing are small, while the financial benefits to their own companies can be quite large. The only way to change that attitude is to change the incentives, namely by increasing the cost of failing to take action. The effectiveness of this approach will depend directly upon the pressure that is applied. That cannot happen without the active role of our U.S. government. Asking our trading partners to uphold their commitments is certainly part of that process, but the olive branch alone has not worked and will not work. It must be supplemented with firmer measures. Yet we must actively use the existing process in the various international agreements that concern intellectual property rights, and yes, we must work with our allies to coordinate our efforts, as many of these are increasingly impacted by this problem too. We literally cannot afford to look the other way and tolerate inaction when our interests are being undermined by governments which profess friendship and profess cooperation, even as their citizens rob ours of their wealth and livelihoods and our country of its prosperity. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, as always, for holding this hearing, and thank you for the kind invitation, Mr. Berman.
We're glad to have you here, Ileana, and now I'm going to recognize the other members who are with us for short, as opposed to my comments. Then, of course, we will all leave. And oh no, I'm pleased to recognize my neighbor and colleague from Los Angeles, Mr. Sherman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If this subject affected only the entertainment industry, that would be well enough reason to have these hearings here today, because the core copyright industries by themselves are 7% of American gross domestic product and are responsible for well in excess of $100 billion of exports each year. But this problem is even larger than the entertainment industry. It affects counterfeit drugs, counterfeit aircraft and auto parts, handbags. In total, counterfeiting costs U.S. business over $250 billion annually. That is increasing. Illegitimate goods have increased from $5.5 billion in 1982 to more than $600 billion annually, and now comprise 6 to 9% of world trade. Counterfeit auto parts alone cost auto companies $12 billion annually, $3 billion to the U.S. companies. Some 750,000 American jobs have been lost due to counterfeit merchandise. There's a threat to consumers, as 10% of all pharmaceuticals worldwide are fake drugs, and 2% of the airline parts installed each year are counterfeit. The benefit to organized crime has been noted by the ranking member. There is also a benefit to terrorism. The 1993 World Trade Center bombing was partially financed through the sale of counterfeit goods. $1.2 million in counterfeit brake pads and shock absorbers were seized in Lebanon. The profits were earmarked for Hezbollah. An Al-Qaeda training manual recommends the sale of counterfeit goods as a source of revenue for that organization. We face a worldwide recession, and I think at the core of our world economic problem is the lopsided trade deficit that the United States has with the world, and a big part of that is the fact that so many countries have, as a matter of policy, decided to allow American copyrights, patents, and trademarks to be infringed upon. Some countries approach this with good faith, and we need to streamline. We need to provide aid to their enforcement efforts. But let's face it, some countries do not have good faith. They are playing us, and we will have to decide as a country whether we're serious about intellectual property or whether we're just going to go through this kabuki dance again, where we send a protest note and one or two counterfeiters are inconvenienced for a while. Ultimately, we'll have to decide whether those who are playing us on the intellectual property issue will have access to U.S. markets, and that will get very controversial. I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and now the casual sort of Hollywood, California gentleman who took off his sunglasses, unfortunately.
Oh.
Mr. Rohrbacher is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing on an issue that should be of the utmost importance to the American people. The theft of America's intellectual property represents a tremendous loss of wealth that undermines the standard of living of our people and undermines the prosperity of our country. America's creative genius has always been our greatest asset. In the last few decades, however, as we have heard, our country has shied away from confronting this issue of intellectual property theft with both friends and countries that are adversarial as well. We can no longer turn a blind eye to this situation. In today's economy, it is our duty to the creative Americans with patents and copyrights to see that their ownership rights are not being violated, and that the value of their creativity is not looted, and that foreign governments that are aiding and abetting this blatant theft are called to task. Mr. Chairman, whether it's an attempt to severely limit damages suffered by our inventors when the rights to their patents are violated, or whether it's the copyright violations which are manifested in the piracy of music and films, American law should be on the side of our creative citizens. American inventors, songwriters, musicians, scriptwriters, and film producers are valuable national assets that we should defend from foreign and, yes, domestic looters. The body of our Constitution, as Ileana has pointed out, mentions the word right, and I might add, it only uses in the body of the Constitution that word once, and that is in reference to the right of inventors and authors to control and profit from their genius. But now we are allowing these rights granted by our Constitution to be violated by foreign thieves. I look forward today to hearing about the details of the magnitude of the challenge that we face in order to put an end to this global and domestic thievery. It's time to bring the hammer down on those who engage in this crime, and I would ask at this time to include in the record remarks on intellectual property theft by my good friend Skunk Baxter, Jeffrey Skunk Baxter, who is was lead guitar player with Steely Dan, and of course the Doobie Brothers, and I would have ask that his remarks be made part of the record.
After we read them no, of course.
Okay.
And without objection, they will be included in the record.
Right. And finally, one point that I'd like to make, and that is Ileana outlined very well the just arrogant theft that's taking place in China. China is widely recognized as an adversarial country to the United States, competitor and adversary, perhaps even a potential enemy. Certainly a non-democratic, authoritarian country that has seen no liberalization of their political system. You might expect this type of theft and this type of behavior from the Chinese, and we should try to push them in the right direction and put pressure on them. But we have trouble with our friends as well, and let us note that many of the pirated items that we are talking about that end up even sent back to the United States, adding insult to injury, they're pirating, selling them overseas, then they bring them here. One of the worst violators of permitting their country to become a transshipment depot happens to be Canada, our best friend. So we have one of our worst adversaries on one side engaging in this crime, but who's aiding and abetting the crime but our best friend, Canada. And Canada refuses, for example, to permit their customs people to seize or to at least stop goods that are being transshipped through Canada in the United States. They won't even permit them to stop these counterfeit items that are blatantly counterfeit items. So we need to hold Canada, our friend, as well as our adversaries. We need to hold them responsible for this, and we need to make sure people know around the world we're getting serious with this issue because it has a dramatic impact on the economic well-being of our people at a time when we cannot take that for granted. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And the gentleman from California, Mr. Royce, a member of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think many people realize just the impact this has on our economy. The estimate is about $5 trillion a year in terms of the portion of our economy, the GDP that comes about as a result of intellectual property, everything from motion pictures to pharmaceuticals. And that's larger than the GDP of any other country on the planet. So when it comes to undermining intellectual property in the U.S., it has a very pronounced effect. But more importantly, I think to us right now, is because of the margins in this particular type of crime, the ability for this to fund terrorism becomes very acute. Hezbollah utilizes this type of activity. As a matter of fact, Assad Ahmad Barakat, who runs the tri-border area in Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil, he has been caught sending checks to Hezbollah. Hezbollah, as a matter of fact, the leadership of Hezbollah have thanked him for his ongoing efforts. Now, today he's in jail for tax evasion in Paraguay, but that hasn't stopped him or his associates from continuing in this endeavor to support the Hezbollah terrorist organization. And as we know, what maybe it cost $1.5 million to run that operation on 9/11, it is very, very vital for these terrorist groups to have access to these types of resources. So unless we shut this down, everything from human trafficking rings to terrorist operations around the planet are funded by this kind of activity. Another reason why India, the Chairman Berman spoke about the need to get India on board. If you think about it, the godfathers of godfathers, as he's called, of Indian organized crime, Dawood Ibrahim, is linked to piracy in a big way.
And frankly, also, he is a big supporter of Al-Qaeda. And in the past, also of the LET. He was largely responsible, that organization was responsible back in '93 for the Mumbai bombings. That series of bombings killed 257 people. Now, D Company is the operation he runs. It's now integrated into every part of the Indian filmmaking industry, from distribution to loan sharking. And I guess a special irony here for those of you who saw Slumdog Millionaires, the fact that a lot was made of organized crime there and the way in which corruption has that insidious effect. Think for a minute, the very people portrayed, the very organized crime syndicate, are involved today in pirating and undermining Bollywood and on undermining Hollywood. One more example, and if they weren't tied to terrorist networks that were engaged in this kind of activity, we'd have enough to worry about. But this should really focus our attention, I'm afraid. The high profit margins in this kind of crime make it little wonder why gangsters and terrorists have turned to piracy. But turning back to the overarching theme of the founding, the architects of this republic, you know, they said patents and copyrights are the legal implementation of the base of all property rights, and that to them was a person's right to the product of that individual's mind. That's why the architects of this republic cared a lot about this concept and put it in the Constitution. That's why we should care, and thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing.
Thank you, and the gentleman, the fifth gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my privilege to represent the cities of Burbank, Glendale, and Pasadena, and several surrounding communities, home to many hardworking Americans who are employed in the entertainment industry, both at movie studios and the recording industry, post-production shops, among other IP enterprises. And I've seen firsthand the toll that intellectual property theft takes on the lives of real Americans. The work product of my constituents is being stolen every day. I've often said that on an individual level, piracy is nothing less than high-tech shoplifting, and in the aggregate, it can destroy whole industries. There's no difference between stealing a DVD from a store and selling a pirated DVD on the street or uploading it to the internet. And when people buy pirated DVDs on the street or download music on the internet without paying for it, they aren't just stealing products, they're stealing jobs from American workers, which with unemployment rates in excess of 10% here in California and approaching that point in other parts of the country, we ought to be more concerned with than ever. A critical component of our nation's competitive strength is the creation of copyright-based goods and services. This is a reality even clearer now as the American automobile industry, once the prime example of 20th century American ingenuity and prowess in manufacturing exports, stands on the brink of collapse. The American assembly line of the 21st century is now made up of the creation, production, and export of things like music, motion pictures, software products, books, accounting for 6% of our nation's GDP. Indeed, the U.S. copyrighted industry is one of the few bright spots in our economy and will serve as a key cornerstone in the effort to rebuild our economy. When one of our trading partners allows copyright infringement to occur with impunity, they're gaming the system and injuring our economy. We have to take much stronger steps to ensure other countries on our list of infringers are forced to take piracy more seriously. In Congress, we've been working to accomplish this as a co-founder and co-chair of the Congressional International Anti-Piracy Caucus, the caucus made up of over 70 members of both the House and Senate. We're committed to reducing the scourge of piracy abroad. Each year we unveil a country watch list signaling out high-priority countries such as Russia and China due to the scope and depth of their piracy problems, which cost U.S. copyright industries and millions of Americans who work in these companies billions of dollars every year. Next month we'll be unveiling our 2009 watch list. I wanted, though, to highlight also the role that some of the American companies and American industries play in tacitly supporting piracy in other parts of the world. For example, unfortunately, many of the major U.S. credit card companies were previously facilitating transactions on a notorious Russian website that has been identified by our U.S. Trade Rep and the Department of Commerce as the world's highest volume online seller of pirated music. But these problems go on. There are a number of fringe online sites that brazenly promote the infringement of U.S. copyrights that also benefit from hosting ads and obtaining ad revenues from legitimate U.S. companies, often at times unbeknownst to these companies. I have, for example, here a screen capture of a website, and I'm not going to give the name of it. It's in the Ukraine because I don't want to promote their illegal business. But if you can see a little more closely on this, they're illegally offering songs and albums from Kelly Clarkson and U2 for sale. And on the front page, you can see logos for Visa and MasterCard. Not only is it problematic to facilitate these transactions, but their inclusion on the page can add a false perception of legitimacy to the website. I think we need to look at how extensive this problem is and how other companies and other industries are at times willingly, at times unknowingly facilitating the piracy of American work product and, by extension, the piracy of American jobs. I'm greatly appreciative to the leadership Chairman Berman has shown on this issue, and I guess I thought we were here as an acting subcommittee of the judiciary. So I must thank you also, since we're here with your Foreign Affairs hat on, Mr. Chairman, to thank you for allowing me to participate as an ex officio member of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, but I do hope Chairman Conyers understands we're not asserting authority to pass copyright amendments in the Foreign Affairs Committee. Although, well, no, never mind. I want to thank all my colleagues and sort of the warm-up act, and now for the feature. We really have a exceptionally knowledgeable panel with us today to discuss global protection of intellectual property rights, and I'd like to introduce them. Mr. Steven Soderbergh is the Director and the National Vice President of the Directors Guild of America. He also chairs the Eastern Directors Council, is co-chair of the Creative Rights Committee, and is chairman of the Eastern Independent Directors Committee. In 2000, two of Mr. Soderbergh's films, and they were remarkable films, Aaron Brockovich and Traffic having just been to Mexico City, it's like that's playing out in real life, were nominated for a Best Director Oscar, making him the first director since 1938 to receive dual Academy Award nominations in the same year in the directing category. He is a prolific filmmaker who has directed 20 films and produced numerous others. Mr. Richard Cook is a 38-year veteran film executive and chairman of Walt Disney Studios. Mr. Cook oversees all aspects of the development, production, distribution, and marketing for all live-action and animated films at Walt Disney Studios. He is also responsible for Disney's worldwide home entertainment operations, Disney Music Group, Disney Theatrical Group, Disney ABC Worldwide Television, and Disney Media Networks, Disney ABC Domestic Television, as well as the studio's legal and business affairs and all areas of new technology. Mr. Michael Miller, Jr. is the International Vice President of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, IATSE, General Executive Board, and also serves as a labor trustee on the Motion Picture Industry Pension and Health Plans. He began his career with IATSE in 1990 when he was initiated into IATSE's Stagehands Local 27 in Cleveland, Ohio. In 1993, he was elected to the executive board of that local and served in that capacity until he was elected secretary-treasurer in 2000. Then joined the IATSE West Coast office as international representative in 2001. Mr. Zach Horowitz is the president and chief operating officer of Universal Music Group and is responsible for Universal's Music Publishing Group, one of the industry's largest and most successful operations. He also oversees a number of other key areas of the company, including Universal Music Group distribution, Universal's leading distribution operation, which includes Vivendi Visual Entertainment and Fontana. Mr. Horowitz serves on the board of directors of the Recording Industry Association of America and holds a post on the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences Presidential Advisory Council. Mr. Horowitz, I will include the statement of the RIAA and Mr. Mitch Bainwall's September letter to me in the hearing record. And finally, we have Timothy Traynor, the founder and president of Global Intellectual Property Strategy Center, an intellectual property legal consulting firm. Mr. Traynor's career includes work with the U.S. government in the intellectual property rights branch of the U.S. Customs Service and in the Office of Legislative and International Affairs for the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Mr. Traynor worked for the law firm Arter and Haddon and served as a past president of the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition. His work has included representing the United States at the World Intellectual Property Organization, representing the industry at Interpol's IP Crime Action Group, and co-chairing the UN's Economic Commission for Europe's IP Group. All of your written statements will be part of the record. If you could try to summarize your statements in about 5 minutes. We're not going to pound the gavel. We have looser California laid-back rules here, Anya, but we'll sort of lightly touch the gavel when you're getting as long as we are, have been. And Mr. Soderbergh, why don't you begin?
Good morning. I'm honored enough to be here and respectful enough of your time to speak briefly and plainly. We're here to talk about piracy, primarily internet piracy. And while I'm here officially representing the Directors Guild, I'd like to speak to you personally. I'm a filmmaker, and so by some loose definition, I'm also an artist. But since the subject of art is very subjective, I want to talk about numbers, because numbers are not subjective. Numbers are inarguably what they are. So here are a few numbers to think about. In 2007, the entertainment industry, despite the piracy figures mentioned by the chairman, generated a trade surplus of $13.6 billion. In 2005, the entertainment industry generated 1.3 million jobs, over $30 billion paid in wages, and over $30 billion paid to vendors and suppliers. That generated $10 billion in paid taxes. As strong as those numbers are, we could do more. We could make an even larger contribution to the economy if it weren't for theft in the form of piracy. I won't bore you in this verbal testimony with figures of how piracy has affected my own work, because I'm not an exceptional case here. Everyone is hurt by this. Most people see the entertainment industry as a bunch of pampered celebrities. I see it that way sometimes. And I wish my saying that that's not true could just instantly dissolve that illusion. Certainly Michael Miller will attest to the fact that most people that work in this industry are resolutely middle class and are largely living paycheck to paycheck. But let's set aside this issue of perception for a moment and get back to the numbers. I guess my question is, if the automobile industry told you that 25% of its cars had gone missing from leaving the assembly line to getting to the car lot, you'd have the Department of Justice doing wind sprints to figure out how to solve this. We're facing a very similar situation. Piracy increases unemployment by reducing the revenues paid to the people providing that employment, and that results in lost jobs. What is our solution here? Well, this is what we know. Litigation is slow and the internet is fast. This may not be the best time to speak about self-regulation, but I don't think it makes much sense for us to ask the government to be the police in this issue. What we would like is to be deputized to solve our own problems. We would like to be granted the kind of pull-down and inspection abilities that we're seeing proposed in France, so that we can act swiftly and fairly on our own behalf. If we're given this ability, I feel we can figure out a way that's efficient and creative to make piracy a difficult last resort instead of a best first option. The other reason to do this is it'll allow the industry to retain and continue to create jobs without asking for taxpayer assistance in the form of government intervention. 40 years ago, as some movies targeted for adults began to show the world as it is instead of as we might wish it to be, censorship bodies sprung up all over the country to determine whether each film complied with community standards. And filmmakers were faced with the possibility of having to screen their films for every one of these groups before they could present their work to the public. This was impractical, to say the least, and a subsequent court ruling deemed that it was illegal as well. The solution was the creation of the MPAA, which established a rating system that we still use today. It works, and it doesn't cost the taxpayers a single penny. The extreme level of competition at all levels of this business has resulted in an intelligent, hardworking, capable workforce. And this business is actually remarkably transparent when you compare it to other businesses of similar scale. It's for these reasons I ask you to empower the industry to confront this problem, which extends to every country and every content provider in the world. Since the United States is the world's largest exporter of entertainment, I believe we have an obligation to create a new paradigm for combating piracy. I don't think it's going to happen without a fresh approach to the way the government and the rights holders interact. I'm here as a member of the creative community to tell you that we're ready and able to confront this problem. I would like to submit some additional materials for the record which will provide details on the impact of piracy of my own films, as well as our thoughts on the French solution and other DGA suggestions for congressional action on this matter. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and the additional submission will be included in the record of this hearing. And Mr. Cook.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for convening this hearing today. No issue is more important to the Walt Disney Studios than the protection of intellectual property. Intellectual property is the core of our business. The ability to protect that intellectual property is what drives our ability to continue investing in new creativity, to tell new stories, and to keep innovating. These are challenging times for the entertainment industry. Movie studios, like other companies, have had a difficult choice in these tough economic conditions. Yet the motion picture industry maintains great promise as a truly unique American industry with a strong history of creating high-paying jobs and contributing to local economies across the United States. Now, more than ever, we should encourage policies that promote investment in this type of creativity. We are facing a sea change in the nature of the piracy challenge. Gone are the days when borders provided a barrier to trafficking in pirated goods. No longer do we live in a world where piracy is confined to a small number of large criminal syndicates. Today, the actions of a single individual can feed an entire chain of online and offline piracy. Most importantly, what happens in one country now has a profound impact on businesses in other countries. Let me share with you an example that illustrates the international scope and complexity of the piracy challenge. Last year, we released WALL-E, a wonderful Disney Pixar film that won the Academy Award for Best Animated Film. The film was released in theaters in the United States on June 27th. It was released in the Ukraine a week later on July 3rd. On July 5th, a copy of the movie that was camcorded in a theater in Kiev appeared for the first time on a Russian internet site. Within 2 days, copies of the same version appeared on a peer-to-peer site. Within 7 days, copies were uploaded on 13 other internet sites. Within 10 days of the film's Ukrainian release, there were copies online in Russian, English, Spanish, Dutch, and Mandarin. The same copy served as a master for physical copies worldwide. This DVD copy was found in Kiev 1 day after a copy first appeared on the internet. One day later, a second copy was purchased in Chicago. The next day, a third copy was purchased in Lima, Peru. A week later, these copies were purchased in Guadalajara, Mexico, and New York City. By July 31st, copies of the same version were purchased in Argentina, Indonesia, Philippines, the UK, China, Canada, Turkey, Hungary, Japan, Russia, Chile, Australia, and Brazil. In total, 54 purchases were made, all sourced from the same copy. Camcording is a major concern. More than 90% of recently released movies on counterfeit DVDs can be sourced to illegal camcording. But camcording also demonstrates that the combined efforts of industry and government can make a difference. In 2005, Mr. Chairman, you joined with then Chairman Smith and Senators Feinstein and Cornyn to pass a law making unauthorized camcording a federal crime. The impact of this law has been dramatic. In 2004, New York was the center of illegal camcording activity. That year, there were 113 camcorder copies traced to New York theaters. In 2008, there were 9. In the 50 states put together, the number of camcorded copies in 2008 was down by almost a third from 2004. When camcording began to decrease in the United States, we noticed increased activity elsewhere, particularly in Canada. Between 2005 and 2006, Canadian-sourced camcorded copies rose by 24%. After consultations with the Canadian government, including cooperative engagements between the United States and Canadian governments, Canada enacted its own camcording law in 2007. Since then, we have seen Canadian-sourced camcorded copies fall by nearly half. As might be expected, effective legislation and enforcement is starting to push this activity elsewhere. Countries without effective camcording legislation, such as the Ukraine, the Philippines, Thailand, and Mexico, have become havens for illegal camcording operations. There is an urgent need for action in an effective international response. The camcording provisions in the recent South Korea and Malaysian FTAs should be a model for future FTAs. Similarly, the United States government should make effective camcording protections a priority in bilateral discussions and in Special 301 determinations. This is an area where we know that can make a difference, but it will take joint efforts of industry and government on an international scale to make it work. There are other manifestations of technological development enabling widespread infringing distribution that demand attention if piracy is going to be meaningfully addressed. A case in point is internet piracy on user-generated content, or UGC sites. In just a few short years, we have seen unprecedented growth in UGC sites and services. Rather than resort to litigation or legislation as our first response to the rampant piracy on these sites, we engaged a number of sites directly in an effort to find a solution. The result was a set of principles for user-generated content services that reflect a shared commitment to eliminating infringement on these sites, including through the use of state-of-the-art filtering technology, while also protecting fair use and promotion of original and authorized user-generated content. Those principles have now been joined by 12 companies in the United States and in Europe, and as a result, we have seen a substantial reduction in piracy on participating UGC sites. But similar to the camcording experience, infringing activity is moving from those sites that are implementing effective filtering technologies to those that do not. Unsurprisingly, many of those sites are located overseas. So as with camcording, a meaningful solution must be an international one. As we engage in UGC sites both domestically and around the world, we continue to advocate a constructive solution along the lines of the ones embodied in the UGC principles. We would strongly encourage the United States government to do what it can to promote similarly effective inter-industry solutions here and in the interactions abroad. Finally, I want to take note that while our problems with piracy and counterfeiting abroad remain significant, we continue to have various serious threats right here at home. The fact is, the United States studios lose more revenue to piracy occurring over broadband networks in this country than they do to piracy in countries abroad like China, Russia, and Thailand, where piracy rates run between 75% and 90%. This is an area, Mr. Chairman, to which you have devoted substantial thought and to which we must continue to devote our energy and attention. I look forward to working constructively with you and other members of the committee as we seek meaningful solutions to these complex problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook and Mr. Miller.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to set forth the impact of piracy on IATSE members. The IATSE was founded in 1893 by a group of stagehands in New York City and has expanded during our 116-year history with local unions chartered throughout the United States and Canada. Today, the IATSE is the largest entertainment union in the world with nearly 120,000 members. For our members, the issues of combating piracy and protecting intellectual property are of paramount concern. There are hundreds of thousands of individuals employed in the entertainment industry. Most are hardworking people who do not earn the millions of dollars that few high-profile actors do, but work in middle-class jobs for middle-class wages and middle-class benefits. Besides the actors and actresses, the number of individuals employed on the production of any given motion picture may be anywhere from 200 to 1,000 employees. They are not in front of the camera, but supply the necessary labor to make those movies. The wages we negotiated for our talented and skilled members are higher than the minimum hourly wage, but must be remembered that often our members have to make their paychecks last much longer because these are not permanent jobs. They're jobs that will end when production is complete, and the next job they get may not be for many months. Because of the nature of our business, we have attempted to ensure that our members and their families are taken care of by securing additional benefits to be provided for them in the form of residual payments. When studios release DVDs to the market, our members share in those sales with these residuals. In the IATSE, those payments are contributed to the health and retirement benefits that our members so desperately need. When pirated copies are selling on the streets or being illegally downloaded from the internet, our members and many more workers see nothing. Piracy is costing these individuals an estimated $100 million in pension and health care benefits annually. Piracy is stealing, pure and simple. Anyone who sells, acquires, or copies these materials without permission is simply a thief. Downloading a movie without paying for it is no different than stealing a DVD off the shelf of a store. Making movies available on the internet for downloading, selling pirated DVDs on the street, or camcording and redistributing movies, broadcasts, or performances are all forms of piracy. Unfortunately for our members, much of the public still perceives the illegal pirating of motion pictures as a victimless crime. But piracy is not a petty and victimless crime. Piracy is a devastating economic attack that in 2005 alone cost our industry $6 billion. And as large as that sum is, it's only a fraction of the $250 billion that copyright piracy cost the overall U.S. economy every year. In fact, in 2005, piracy cost the movie industry more than 141,000 jobs and $5.5 billion in annual lost wages, while depriving state and local governments of $837 million in tax revenue, money that could have gone towards roads, schools, or infrastructure and help further shore up American communities. Downloading movies and music without the authorization of copyright holders is a growing international problem, and we need to take action. Recently, the international community has started to get involved, and China, Russia, and the EU have drafted legislation to implement or increase criminal penalties for counterfeiting and intellectual property, but that is not enough. Other international law enforcement agencies have recognized that piracy is a serious crime and are beginning to step up their efforts to prevent or maybe reduce it. Mexico has begun to step up its fight against piracy by creating new advertising aimed at children and statements by officials that denounce piracy as an illegal activity that supports more sinister aspects of organized crime. The IATSE consists of members in both the United States and Canada, and our Canadian brothers and sisters are seeking relief from the Canadian government in the form of anti-piracy legislation as well. Canadian movie theaters account for nearly 50% of all camcorded sources worldwide, and Canadians' film industry are taking steps to attempt to address that. Amendments to Canada's criminal code were passed in 2006, which made individuals videotaping a movie for purposes of resale punishable by up to 5 years in prison. In addition, there's currently an initiative led by Canadian Motion Pictures Distributors Association and other industry stakeholders to support amendments to the Copyright Act in Canada. They have not yet been successful. What can we do? Well, first, just as this society punishes bank robbers, this society should punish those pirates who rob us of our intellectual property. Sadly, the U.S. government has not been in the forefront of this movement. In 2008, there were only 11 federal cases brought, and of those, 5 defendants pled guilty, and 1 defendant was actually tried and found guilty. We can hope that the states are also enforcing these laws more rigorously. Secondly, we seek to support the sponsorship of stronger legislation protecting intellectual property. On the federal level, we now have the Pro-IP Act of 2008, which increases penalties for violating U.S. copyright and trademark laws and creates a cabinet-level IP czar to advise the president and coordinate federal programs and policy designed to combat piracy. Finally, we'd like to reach out to the studios and employers of our members to work together to find new ways of encouraging legal downloading of movies and content. If the audience for movies can be reached with quick, legal, high-quality downloads, this would produce an economic benefit almost immediately. The entertainment industry is one of the largest exporters of product in the United States, and right now is one of the few areas in which our economy thrives. It provides revenue for our government and employment for a vast number of U.S. citizens. We must collectively take strong action against this problem as expeditiously as possible. The movie industry is a significant portion of the economy, accounting for about 1.3 million jobs, over $30 billion in wages, and $10 billion in federal and state taxes each year. The loss of more than $6 billion in any year to piracy is unacceptable. The majority of the workers hurt by piracy are not the big-name actors or wealthy producers, as they make up a very small percentage of the motion picture industry workforce. The people who are hurt the most are the ones working behind the scenes in middle-class jobs on a job-to-job employment. Motion picture piracy is not something that can be ignored. It's a serious crime, and we in the IATSE and about 1 million other hardworking men and women are its victims. On behalf of the IATSE, I'm particularly appreciative of this opportunity to have testimony presented to you, and I thank the committee for inviting us to participate. If we can be of any assistance or answer any questions, we remain available. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. And now, Zach Horowitz. We look forward to hearing from you.
Mr. Chairman,
let me interrupt you for 1 second. Two announcements. This is no longer Florida and Southern California. We have been joined, I'm very happy to say, by our colleague from Houston, Texas, Ms. Sheila Jackson-Lee, a member of the committee and interested in these issues. And I also want to particularly acknowledge the presence of 2 distinguished representatives from the consulate, the Consul General of France, David Martinon, and the Executive Director of Film and TV Department. Notice, in France, the Consul General has a position, Executive Director of the Film and TV Department. Maybe some of our embassies and consulates should have someone like that. But Lawrence Morley, we're very happy to have both of you with us today. Mr. Horowitz.
Mr. Chairman, let me begin by thanking you for the many hours over many decades you have dedicated to America's creative community. Effective copyright laws give us the confidence to look for the next new sound, but we need your help. 1 in 3 CDs sold globally are made by pirates, and only 1 in 20 downloads is legitimate. We estimate that there were over 40 billion illegal downloads in 2008. That's an online piracy rate of 95%. And when it comes to physical piracy, 90% of recorded music sales in places like China and Russia are counterfeit. Even in many EU countries, the piracy rate is over 50%. These bleak statistics have real costs. Our domestic music industry loses over $5 billion annually in global piracy. And because U.S. music is the most popular genre around the globe, piracy disproportionately affects U.S. artists and the U.S. economy. It means lost jobs and lost tax revenues. If we can't secure a return on our investments, we cannot invest in developing artists. How many great artists will go undiscovered? Will piracy cheat us out of the next Beethoven or the next Beatles? We'll never know. And as manufacturing jobs disappear, intellectual property is how our kids will earn their livelihoods. The stakes are incredibly high, but IP protection has not been the national priority that it needs to be.
While we appreciate the complexities of trying to protect intellectual property in a world with different legal regimes and cultures, every country should be expected to abide by basic principles of fairness and the rule of law. You can be a powerful force in sending that message. AllofMP3.com, which has been mentioned by some of you today, was a Russian company, and it provides a perfect illustration of how the U.S. government can make a difference. All of MP3 was an online service that sold all the most popular music of the world without any authorization from artists or rights holders. Users were charged a few cents per song, which gave the site a patina of legitimacy. And this was, the purchases were redeemed through MasterCard or Visa. No money was ever paid out to artists or rights holders. By 2006, it was one of the world's most popular music sites. When the music industry brought the site to the attention of Congress, members like you made the rogue operation the focal point of dialogues on global piracy. When Russian officials wanted to discuss membership in the WTO, the U.S. government used AllofMP3.com as an example of why Russia was not ready to join the global alliance. Over time, the spotlight led to action by the Russian government. One of the world's most notorious illegal music sites was reined in because U.S. officials brought attention to its indefensible business model. The success in handling AllofMP3.com demonstrates that legislation is not the only tool in Congress's arsenal, and that traditional law enforcement is not the administration's only leverage. We could use that kind of spotlight on Baidu, China's #1 online search engine. Baidu purposely provides links to unauthorized music sites and is responsible for 50% of the internet-based piracy in China. Google recently launched a fully authorized online music service in China to compete with Baidu. It will be free to users, and content creators will share an ad revenue generated by the site. But can Google China overcome Baidu's first mover advantage, or the competitive disadvantage of compensating artists and rights holders when Baidu does not? Our piracy problems are not limited to faraway places like Russia and China. Regrettably, as has been mentioned, our closest neighbors present some of our worst piracy challenges. The OECD estimates that Canada has the highest level of online piracy in the world. Amazingly, Canada still has not modernized its copyright law for the digital age and is now a haven for those running unauthorized music websites. And in Mexico, piracy has reached epidemic proportions. 7 out of 10 CDs sold are pirated. We hope this committee will call out Canada for its utter disregard for the policies at the heart of copyright and its indifference to the realities of the borderless digital marketplace. And we urge the committee to add its voice to those calling on Mexico's leaders for sustained and consistent anti-piracy enforcement initiatives. Another area where this committee can make a difference is with the USTR's Special 301 list. It would be productive for the committee to meet with the ambassadors from the most problematic countries so that you can make clear that lax IP enforcement is unacceptable. They need to be left with a real sense that there are meaningful repercussions for our trading partners if they don't resolve the 301 issues that place them on the list. This would be especially valuable for Mexico and Canada here. Mr. Chairman, we are in a technology revolution where we have the real opportunity to bring music to fans everywhere, when they want, where they want, and how they want, in legitimate ways never dreamed of before. However, unless we are vigilant, unless there is basic protection for the work of those who labor so hard to create the magic that is music, the opportunities afforded by breakthroughs in technology will be lost. This will be a tragedy for musicians and fans, for the global economy, and for our culture. We hope that the committee and Congress can send this powerful message to the world. Thank you for your interest and for your continuing efforts on behalf of creators.
Thank you very much, Zach. Mr. Trainer.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I thank the chairman and the committee for the privilege and opportunity to provide a summary of my full testimony regarding the issue of global IP theft. IP crimes threaten our national economic security, consumer safety, and the economic health of our employers and investors, the companies that research, develop, manufacture, and distribute products that incorporate their trademarks, patents, copyrights, trade secrets, and other IP assets. Governments around the world have enacted new and stronger IP laws. They've seized hundreds of millions of dollars worth of counterfeit and pirate products and prosecuted many IP criminals. Yet the overall picture of global IP counterfeiting and piracy appears generally unchanged from a decade ago. At the outset, I outlined some of my recommendations. On the domestic front, they are to instruct Customs to adopt its proposed IP rules that were first published in October 2004. Strengthen IP enforcement by providing clear ex officio authority, improve consumer protection against counterfeit and pirate products by decreasing dependence on post-entry audits, amend relevant laws to clearly authorize enforcement actions against infringing goods that are being exported and moving in transit through the United States, strengthen the legal provisions to permit judicial forfeiture of infringing goods and the collection of penalties and fines, increase IP-dedicated customs officers to IP enforcement, and fund executive branch agency programs to specifically address the U.S. demand side for infringing goods. My recommendations for the U.S. on the global front are to continue efforts to raise IP enforcement standards with our trading partners through free trade agreements, and I would echo the comments that have been made already by my fellow panelists here with regard to Canada. Also to work with intergovernmental organizations to promote increased enforcement activity and new standards, provide better IP enforcement assistance programs to our trading partners, and expand IP technical assistance programs to include IP awareness. Our challenge? Today's market reality provides counterfeiters and pirates with almost unlimited opportunities. Piracy and counterfeiting problems pose serious public health and safety risks, some of which have been well documented while others have not. Some recent examples include cases involving construction cranes, toothpaste, toothbrushes, spacecraft parts, lifestyle drugs, eye toner, and cosmetic lenses. The role of the internet is implicated even where hard goods are involved. Although products must still be transported, the internet is used to offer counterfeit and pirate goods, to take orders for goods, and to conduct the financial transactions. Counterfeiters and pirates can easily take advantage of increased bandwidth, an ever faster internet, a global digital system that grows hourly, and a global system of trade facilitation that promotes uninterrupted movement of goods. With regard to volume and some of our conclusions, the latest available annual customs IP seizure statistics from the United States, European Union, and Japan total over 80,000 cases. These customs statistics are just a piece of the puzzle in fitting together the picture of global piracy and counterfeiting, because not every customs administration has detailed statistics of its IP border enforcement activity. U.S. IP owners are injured around the world. For example, in Uganda, Procter & Gamble reported that it had lost 20% of market share during a 3-month period because of fake and counterfeit products. Some of the most startling cases have occurred more recently, years after IP enforcement has been highlighted globally and years after governments and industry have made it a priority issue. One case involved a joint U.S.-EU effort that resulted in the seizure of over 360,000 integrated circuits and computer networking components. A second case involved Cisco computer network products that made their way to the FAA, FBI, and other sensitive U.S. agencies. Separately, a 19-month-long investigation by Customs resulted in charging 29 individuals with conspiracy to smuggle 950 shipments of counterfeit goods into the United States. The estimated value of the seized goods, had they been genuine, was $700 million. The cases against the individuals, the defendants involved charges of money laundering, smuggling, and conspiracy to import counterfeit goods. The few cases mentioned here point to a global piracy and counterfeiting problem that goes far beyond the old notions of mom-and-pop operations. The quantities involved, the value of goods in these cases, and the global distribution channels linking manufacturers on one continent to distributors and sellers on another point to a more sophisticated network. As the last case above demonstrates, today's global trade in counterfeit and pirate products is a business that includes people in the operation that know how to move product. The more troubling aspect of these cases is that after many years of highlighting this problem and attacking the problem with more raids, seizures, and destruction of goods, as well as imprisonment of defendants, we continue to see what seems to be a growing onslaught of illegal activity. The fact is that all the enforcement actions by the U.S., EU, and other governments and their law enforcement authorities have not deterred criminals from engaging in massive-scale counterfeiting, and piracy. In conclusion, what is clearly evident is that the singular message of IP enforcement is insufficient and inadequate. Governments and industry must become much more creative and imaginative in their messaging about IP. What are the benefits and advantages of intellectual property? We need to improve our ability to demonstrate why intellectual property in and of itself is good for all and balance the enforcement message with something that is positive. I look forward to responding to any questions the committee may have. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all very much. There are a lot of specifics in your testimony that I think we can pursue. We'll now move from that California thing back to Washington for strict enforcement of the 5-minute rule, with the exception of our colleague from Texas who missed a chance to have the opening statement. So I'll give Sheila Jackson Lee a few extra minutes. The 5 minutes includes not only our speeches and our questions, but your answers. So members should tailor the initial comments accordingly. I'll yield myself 5 minutes. I guess this is maybe more particularly to Mr. Cook and Mr. Horowitz, but anyone on the panel who wants to add to it. You've made a number of We've talked about some situations and some suggestions. Mr. Traynor, you raised some very specific issues, which I think makes sense for me to talk with Mr. Rangel and the Ways and Means Committee about. But one of the things I've heard for many years as we move on this path is you guys are suffering these losses not primarily because of piracy, because the industry hasn't adopted new business models. Whatever truth there was to that in the late 1990s, circumstances have changed. And I was wondering if either of you and anyone else on the panel could describe the efforts taken by the industry to help compete with free, and what efforts can Congress take to help you outside the marketplace in other countries. But particularly your efforts to provide consumers what they want the way they want it.
I think that anyone that has taken a look at the business in the last year or so will definitely not subscribe to the theory that the industry is not doing anything. I can speak for Disney, which actually I think we've been the leader in most of in meeting these new challenges and new business models. We've embraced the view that the best way to meet these challenges is to make our products readily available through legitimate means on a well-timed, well-priced basis. In doing that, we were the first to offer TV shows and full-length feature films for downloads on iTunes. We were the first to put our movies on day-and-date rentals with the DVD release, and the first company to stream our television and content online. And trying to get the material out faster in legitimate ways and at prices that are reasonable. It's always very difficult to compete with free, but we're trying to do that and get them on a timely basis and well-priced and to the public in the best means we possibly can through the internet.
Mr. Horowitz?
Last year, Universal Music probably had over 500 licenses of our music to all sorts of new, innovative business models, everything from downloads to subscription services to ad-supported services where it feels like free, but free for the consumer, but rights holders and artists are compensated. I think the lessons of Napster for the music industry is that if we don't find ways to make our music available legitimately to the consumer, the void will be filled by illegitimate users. And we have been, not just Universal, but the music industry generally have been probably at the forefront of finding new ways to bring our music to consumers. It is hard to compete with free. It is hard to compete with countries that seem to have absolutely no respect for intellectual property. And I think it's important for us to have these kinds of meetings with people like you, because education becomes a key way of making people aware of the problem.
Thank you. This will have about a little over a minute left. You spoke about the Visa MasterCard issue with allmymp3.com, and a number of us met with their representatives to get them to discontinue. Are there other kinds of things that we in Congress can do, apart from the legislative approach, that can be helpful here? Questions. Should Baidu be allowed to be listed on the stock exchange, given without some of the practices that some of our user-generated sites are now engaging in terms of filtering? Any thoughts on how we bring pressure to bear on an American interest which support international piracy, consciously or just by indirect facilitation?
Well, Visa and MasterCard are sort of the good housekeeping seal of approval, and they provide an air of legitimacy to whatever sites use their services. And it was absolutely critical when Congresspeople met with Visa and MasterCard and conveyed this to them, and ultimately they backed down.
I think I'm going to, in order to enforce the rule on myself, I'm going to say our time is up. No, I know, but we'll come around again. So I apologize, but the ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for pointing out all of the domestic measures that have been taken, need to be taken, and international action as well. I was wondering if Mr. Soderbergh could flesh out a little bit his idea about deputizing the industry itself in order to take action, and wanted to know the panelists' thoughts on that.
Well, when you go into Target and shoplift, there's a security guy from Target that catches you, and then they make a decision whether or not they're going to take you to the police and prosecute you. At the very least, you're not allowed to go into Target anymore. And I just feel like we're in a similar situation here. There aren't enough police officers in the world to sit at Target and Walmart and all the places where crimes are being committed. It wouldn't be very difficult for us if we were given, this ability to identify the people who are making it easiest to transmit this copyrighted material. And if we had some sort of, graduated mechanism to along the lines of the French model, first they're contacted through the internet, then they're contacted through the mail, then the third time they get pulled for a year. I mean, I think any solution that involves suing people and taking people into court is just not going to work. It's not practical. And on a public relations level, it's disastrous.
So you're basing it on the French model that has been successful. Are there any differences in terms of laws, procedures that you would find that might be a problem for us?
Well, I think trying to get legislation enacted that gives us this ability is going to be really tricky. I also think that the industry has to discuss what we're doing on the internet now, how we're placing content on the internet. Because I think in the mind of the consumer, when you have sites, that have come up recently in which there's a lot of material available for free, most of it television, that may work that may work in the sense that it's supposed to draw eyeballs to the show and get them to become regular viewers of the show. What I think it may be doing, though, in the minds of the consumer is promulgating this idea that if it's on the internet, it's free. And they're going, well, I don't understand. I can get this whole series that I love. They're giving me access to this for free, but then that same place makes a movie and they're telling me I got to pay for it. Then there's the pay structure itself. We're all running toward a business model that drops our price point per unit precipitously. We're now charging people the least amount of money for the easiest access to our product, when I feel like we should be looking at our pricing and making it easier for them to go out to a movie theater, for instance, and rewarding them for making that effort instead of making that the most expensive price point in our business. But these are just my own theories.
Thank you. If you could comment, anybody else on the panel?
Just to amplify, under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, the ISPs have what's called safe harbor, but they are the key vehicles by which the illegal sites are able to get their music to the consumers. We're very encouraged by conversations we're having with many of the ISPs on the music side about this graduated response, the automatic warning system. We're having conversations you've probably heard with everyone from AT&T to Comcast to Cox, and we hope that
shipments of counterfeit goods into the United States. The estimated value of the seized goods, had they been genuine, was $700 million. The cases against the individuals, the defendants involved charges of money laundering, smuggling, and conspiracy to import counterfeit goods. The few cases mentioned here point to a global piracy and counterfeiting problem that goes far beyond the old notions of mom-and-pop operations. The quantities involved, the value of goods in these cases, and the global distribution channels linking manufacturers on one continent to distributors and sellers on another point to a more sophisticated network. As the last case above demonstrates, today's global trade in counterfeit and pirate products is a business and includes people in the operation that know how to move product. The more troubling aspect of these cases is that after many years of highlighting this problem and attacking the problem with more raids, seizures, and destruction of goods, as well as imprisonment of defendants, we continue to see what seems to be a growing onslaught of illegal activity. The fact is that all the enforcement actions by the U.S., EU, and other governments and their law enforcement authorities have not deterred criminals from engaging in massive-scale counterfeiting and piracy. In conclusion, what is clearly evident is that the singular message of IP enforcement is insufficient and inadequate. Governments and industry must become much more creative and imaginative in their messaging about IP. What are the benefits and advantages of intellectual property? We need to improve our ability to demonstrate why intellectual property in and of itself is good for all and balance the enforcement message with something that is positive. I look forward to responding to any questions the committee may have. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all very much. There are a lot of specifics in your testimony that I think we can pursue. We'll now move from that California thing back to Washington for strict enforcement of the 5-minute rule, with the exception of our colleague from Texas who missed a chance to have the opening statement. So I'll give Sheila Jackson Lee a few extra minutes. The 5 minutes includes not only our speeches and our questions, but your answers. So members should tailor the initial comments accordingly. I'll yield myself 5 minutes. I guess this is maybe more particularly to Mr. Cook and Mr. Horowitz, but anyone on the panel who wants to add to it. You've made a number of you've talked about some situations and some suggestions. Mr. Traynor, you raised some very specific issues, which I think makes sense for me to talk with Mr. Rangel and the Ways and Means Committee about. But one of the things I've heard for many years as we move on this path is you guys are suffering these losses not primarily because of piracy, because the industry hasn't adopted new business models. Whatever truth there was to that in the late 1990s, circumstances have changed. And I was wondering if either of you and anyone else on the panel could describe the efforts taken by the industry to help compete with free, and what efforts can Congress take to help you outside the marketplace in other countries. But particularly your efforts to provide consumers what they want the way they want it.
I think that anyone that has taken a look at the business in the last year or so will definitely not subscribe to the theory that the industry is not doing anything. I can speak for Disney, which actually I think we've been the leader in most of in meeting these new challenges and new business models. We've embraced the view that the best way to meet these challenges is to make our products readily available through legitimate means on a well-timed, well-priced basis. In doing that, we were the first to offer TV shows and full-length feature films for downloads on iTunes. We were the first to put our movies on day-and-date rentals with the DVD release, and the first company to stream our television and content online, and trying to get the material out faster in legitimate ways and at prices that are reasonable. It's always very difficult to compete with free, but we're trying to do that and get them on a timely basis and well-priced and to the public in the best means we possibly can through the internet.
Mr. Horowitz?
Last year, Universal Music probably had over 500 licenses of our music to all sorts of new, innovative business models, everything from downloads to subscription services to ad-supported services where it feels like free, but free for the consumer, but rights holders and artists are compensated. I think the lessons of Napster for the music industry is that if we don't find ways to make our music available legitimately to the consumer, the void will be filled by illegitimate users. And we have been, not just Universal, but the music industry generally, have been probably at the forefront of finding new ways to bring our music to consumers. It is hard to compete with free. It is hard to compete with countries that seem to have absolutely no respect for intellectual property. And I think it's important for us to have these kinds of meetings with people like you, because education becomes a key way of making people aware of the problem.
Thank you. This will have about a little over a minute left. You spoke about the Visa MasterCard issue with allmymp3.com, and a number of us met with their representatives to get them to discontinue. Are there other kinds of things that we in Congress can do, apart from the legislative approach, that can be helpful here? Questions. Should Baidu be allowed to be listed on the stock exchange, given without some of the practices that some of our user-generated sites are now engaging in terms of filtering? Any thoughts on how we bring pressure to bear on an American interest which support international piracy, consciously or just by indirect facilitation?
Well, Visa and MasterCard are sort of the good housekeeping seal of approval, and they provide an air of legitimacy to whatever sites use their services. And it was absolutely critical when Congresspeople met with Visa and MasterCard and conveyed this to them, and ultimately they backed down.
I think I'm going to, in order to enforce the rule on myself, I'm going to say our time is up. No, I know, but we'll come around again. So I apologize, but the ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for pointing out all of the domestic measures that have been taken, need to be taken, and international action as well. I was wondering if Mr. Soderbergh could flesh out a little bit his idea about deputizing the industry itself in order to take action, and wanted to know the panelists' thoughts on that.
Well, when you go into Target and shoplift, there's a security guy from Target that catches you, and then they make a decision whether or not they're going to take you to the police and prosecute you. At the very least, you're not allowed to go into Target anymore. And I just feel like we're in a similar situation here. There aren't enough police officers in the world to sit at Target and Walmart and all the places where crimes are being committed. It wouldn't be very difficult for us if we were given, this ability to identify the people who are making it easiest to transmit this copyrighted material. And if we had some sort of, graduated mechanism to along the lines of the French model, first they're contacted through the internet, then they're contacted through the mail, then the third time they get pulled for a year. I mean, I think any solution that involves suing people and taking people into court is just not going to work. it's not practical. And on a public relations level, it's disastrous.
So you're basing it on the French model that has been successful. Are there any differences in terms of laws, procedures that you would find that might be a problem for
Well,
us?
I think trying to get legislation enacted that gives us this ability is going to be really tricky. I also think that the industry has to discuss what we're doing on the internet now, how we're placing content on the internet. Because I think in the mind of the consumer, when you have sites, that have come up recently in which there's a lot of material available for free, most of it television, that may work that may work in the sense that it's supposed to draw eyeballs to the show and get them to become regular viewers of the show. What I think it may be doing, though, in the minds of the consumer is promulgating this idea that if it's on the internet, it's free. And they're going, well, I don't understand. I can get this whole series that I love. They're giving me access to this for free, but then that same place makes a movie and they're telling me I got to pay for it. Then there's the pay structure itself. We're all running toward a business model that drops our price point per unit precipitously. We're now charging people the least amount of money for the easiest access to our product, when I feel like we should be looking at our pricing and making it easier for them to go out to a movie theater, for instance, and rewarding them for making that effort instead of making that the most expensive price point in our business. But these are just my own theories.
Thank you. If you could comment, anybody else on the panel?
Just to amplify, under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, the ISPs have what's called safe harbor, but they are the key vehicles by which the illegal sites are able to get their music to the consumers. We're very encouraged by conversations we're having with many of the ISPs on the music side about this graduated response, the automatic warning system. We're having conversations you've probably heard with everyone from AT&T to Comcast to Cox, and we hope that they will lead to things that echo what's happening, what's being discussed in places like France and the UK and New Zealand.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the lady has expired, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'm a bit confused as to how this French model that you propose would work. You say that the offending site gets pulled. That means that internet users in the United States are not able to get to that site. Is that the way it would work?
I guess my limited understanding of it, this is something that was just enacted, is that the ISP in the third round is after these two warnings is pulled off. And
I'm trying to understand what pulled off.
ISP or the user?
It's the user that is on this ISP that has been tracked as trafficking in copyrighted material.
So
they then lose the ability to be on that site for a year.
That site for a year. So you're saying if Joe Schmo in the United States logs on to a Chinese site and downloads a movie, then Joe Schmo will continue to be able to use the internet but won't be allowed to go to that particular site again, which Chinese site will then open up 50 other sites. It'd be interesting to see how well this is working for the French. Mr. Horowitz and Mr. Miller, what are the politics in Canada that are preventing Canada from adopting good IP protection, given the importance of the U.S.-Canada relationship to Canada, but also given the importance of IP industries in Canada to Canada? Mr. Horowitz?
Well, my colleagues in Canada have taken to calling the Great White North the Great Black Hole when it comes to copyright protection. There seems to be a complete indifference bordering on disdain for any sort of copyright protection, which is astonishing when you consider that this is one of our most important allies, a great trading partner, a developed nation. They have not brought their laws into compliance with WIPO, and as a result, this has become the haven for websites that traffic in.
Let me ask a rhetorical and extreme question. That is, should we provide any copyright protection for any video material or movie where the value added is over 50% Canadian? That's a hypothetical question. I know the. Mr. Cook, I'm trying to understand camcordering. It seems very easy, and yet with Wally, some very sophisticated criminals waited till the movie got to the Ukraine. They could have gotten it here in the United States a week sooner. As I understand this camcording, all an organized crime enterprise would have to do is bribe the guy that projects the movies at the theater to just give them a special midnight screening. They could set up their camcorder. How is it that we were successful at least in the United States, in preventing the camcording and forcing the criminals to wait until you decided to release the movie in the Ukraine? And then secondly, are these criminals sophisticated enough to then dub the movie into a dozen other languages, presumably almost as well as Disney dubbed the movie? Because I assume that when they camcorded it, they only got it in either Russian or Ukrainian. I don't know which language that theater used. They were sophisticated enough to dub it into a dozen languages, but not sophisticated enough to get somebody in Hoboken to let them get it. They had to wait till it went to the Ukraine.
Well, I think what's happened in the United States is that through a lot of education with the theater owners and with the theater managers and with all of them, they know that it's against the law. There are countless things that go out to notify them that it is against the law to do that, and we've been successful in catching them. And it's the reason all the camcording in New York has been down so dramatically. So I think that's been a big part of it. And you know, the ones that are camcording, some of them are extremely sophisticated. They wait to go to the Ukraine because there is no law against it. They can do it. They can go in and make very sophisticated copies. Some of the copies that I brought along to show are they're maybe not quite as good as coming right out of Pixar, but it's nearly as good. And they can soon either do subtitled or actual their own voice recordings and all, and they're not as good, but they're good enough in many cases.
The time of the gentleman has expired. But the U.S. experience is a little bit like what Mr. Soderbergh was talking about, working with theater owners, like working with store security. The gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So I take it from the testimony today that we're talking about several major challenges, but at least the biggest, if not one of the biggest, is dealing with the downloading of material that is owned by someone else, and by the studios, and thus the people who are involved with producing the material are not getting their money and not being paid. Just downloads from the internet. Is that what we're talking about? Is one of the biggest challenges that we face? Then, isn't there a technological answer to this somewhere? I mean, isn't there? I am on the Science Committee as well as on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and it would seem to me that if we have a vehicle, a technological vehicle, and that's what's being used, there should be. Isn't there a poison pill we can put into our product that will prevent it from being downloaded unless there's something done that would identify that?
Well, I think there are two issues there. There's no question that you could probably create a sort of encryption that wreaks havoc whenever it's downloaded and played. Within days, probably, there's a very, very bright Dutch teenager that would figure out how to break that encryption. One of my more radical solutions is to start finding those people and having them work for us. Since they're doing this for free, maybe we could pay them to beat their pals at their own game. It worked in Catch Me If You Can.
Whose movie?
Steven Spielberg, who ought to be here as well. And then I think there are some, if you would be the ones to know, that there are sort of legal ramifications about creating something like that, even though they're theoretically trafficking in copyrighted material, the damage that you might create that could move beyond them personally might become a legal issue.
Let me note that there are in other arenas in the intelligence arena of our government, there are certain technologies that are at play that I think could be put to work here. And I don't know exactly how free I am to discuss them here, however. But with that said, I think that we should thoroughly investigate.
Is this the one where the computer explodes?
No, anyway, but I think that we should, Mr. Chairman, actually go into this and look towards it and see if there is a technological solution that we could bring forward to the industry, and I'd be happy to talk to you about some of these things off the record. Also, the second issue that I'd like to bring up now, and my time is almost up, is again Canada. You see, we expect China to act like a potential enemy and an adversary of the United States. We don't expect that from Canada, and it's so disturbing to know that Canada is becoming the transshipment depot of the world for goods coming into goods that are counterfeited in China end up coming through Canada to come here. What would you suggest, that, Mr. Horowitz, that we actually do to Canada? Give me a retaliation that we can do.
I think the most important practical thing you could do is engage directly with the Canadian government.
Well, what do we threaten them with? Tell me. I am agreeing with you. I'm calling on the United States government today to retaliate against Canada, do something specific to try to get them to pay attention to something they could solve. This is definitely within their capabilities, but they are intentionally not solving it. What can we do? What's the retaliation that we should seek from our government against them?
I don't have the answer.
Anybody else have the answer? Come on.
Well, they're very polite. We could say please.
Come on. Let's. Here's your to You've got us here. We got somebody we can actually influence.
Well, I mean, the only thing that's going to
the military option is off.
Exactly.
Anybody else have a?
Well, I mean, the only thing that's going to have any teeth is actually something along the lines of when their content comes this way, that it's harder for them to make the kind of profits on their material that, they're allowed to make because...
Let me offer this. If anybody could come to me and tell me specifically what you're suggesting, what the industry is suggesting, I will work with the chairman and try to see if we can push it in that direction. Give me some suggestions.
The time of the gentleman's expired.
Thank you.
And just sort of the chairman's abuse of his prerogatives. The irony is, this is the country that pays taxpayer money to cover labor costs of American producers who will they want to make intellectual property in Canada. Right. They just don't want to protect it in Canada. The generally...
If I could suggest that perhaps we ask the Canadian ambassador to brief us weekly on this.
I think that's a subcommittee issue. But monthly, I'm open. The gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 7 minutes to use as she wishes.
Nothing.
It's on.
It's on. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And the suggestion of meeting with the committee in Washington weekly might be the sufficient punishment that might motivate them. We might consider that suggestion, Mr. Chairman. I am very pleased that the chairman has focused us on an issue of great importance, but more importantly that he has enormous expertise, and I'm delighted that the ranking member is here. Let me, as a Texan with stars in our eyes, thank all of these presenters, and particularly make note of the fact that when we come from places like Texas, we are, in fact, star-bitten. So let me thank all of you for the movies, entertainment that we've had the pleasure of enjoying, and particularly those, Mr. Soderbergh, that have been both entertaining and with a message, and we appreciate it greatly. We've been using a term that our president has reinstituted, and I like to use it now, the urgency of now. That phrase was first utilized by Dr. Martin Luther King, and frankly I think that we have come to a point where we have nowhere to go but to hit this crisis head on. And I'd just like to put these numbers in the record that have probably already been, but the motion picture industry has suffered piracy that has resulted in $6.1 billion in piracy. It's 80% of the U.S. motion picture studio losses. And then to determine that $200 billion in 2005 has been, since 2005, which is a lot of money. Then the Intellectual Property Alliance has noted that 43 countries resulted in an estimated $18.3 billion in trade losses, $3.5 billion in China and $2.6 billion in India, in Russia, excuse me. I think we have a monumental crisis, and I believe that we need to roll up our sleeves and take all the ideas that we can. Ms. Soderbergh, I like both of your ideas. I think we need to understand the one that France has put in place, but I think the pricing question is something to really look at, because I would tell you that many populations, inner city populations, rural populations, would like to go to the theater. They now have access to the internet, like to have it, but might be receptive to being rewarded and fill those theater facilities and create additional jobs, which I think is very important. So I'm going to pose questions to all of you. Ms. Trainer, if we were to begin to look at countries, and, well, say, for example, we looked at the suggestion in France, would we have any First Amendment problems in terms of someone's ability to have free expression, to be using the internet, etc.?
I think in the way the U.S. Judicial system works with litigation, we always have that possibility. I think one of the issues is to really look at the internet community, and we know that, for example, in the New Zealand situation that was raised, they actually postponed the implementation of some of their provisions simply because of the global outcry as to what they had proposed, which is very similar to France. So I think the problem is there are multiple sides to this issue, and before something like this is formally proposed, there will be a lot of communities that have to be consulted with.
So we have to get our hands around it and really vet it so that we can have something that will work. Mr. Cook, again, do you find this problem internationally, meaning the kind of problems that we're having? Is India, with its problems of participating in this, can they be an ally because of Bollywood? Is there any way that we could reach out to them and get them to see that this is a mutual loss, which I understand they're losing dollars as well?
Well, they are. I think the recent estimates are something like $5 billion a year, representing, they also feel there's a loss of some 800,000 jobs. They have obviously a very robust film community that is being rocketed in the wrong direction. It's becoming a giant problem for them. Certainly, we can learn from anyone that is doing it well. I'm not sure they're doing it well right now at all.
Well, since they have a problem where they're taking some of our intellectual property, this is a Foreign Affairs Committee, we need to use a hammer, maybe along with some sugar, and India might be a place to go because they are being mutually victims but also taking advantage of us.
Absolutely.
Mr. Horowitz, if we were to meet with ambassadors. I think you mentioned the 301 list, and we were to meet with ambassadors. My colleague asked the question, but do we add more countries to the list? How should we handle this? Again, this is a hammer, or the, if you will, the chicken and egg, or anything to get people to come to the table. Do we use a hammer in this meeting? Do we put more people on the 301 list, or nations?
You know, Canada has been on the 301 list for 13 years now.
So you wonder what the impact is.
Right. But I think that one thing to consider is that there are attachés, IP attachés in many of our embassies. And I think it would be worthwhile for this committee to talk to them and find out what's working and what isn't. And perhaps one of the solutions would be to increase the number of attachés that we have around the world.
Chairman mentioned a similar position that France has, which is a producer or a arts person that would be looking at these issues. Mr. Traynor, quickly, I think we can help you by having more Customs and Border Patrol agents. You said we never fulfilled our responsibilities on that, and I'd like to say yes to that as quickly as possible to move forward on that. I just want to get my last question into Mr. Miller. These jobs are created all over America. When films come to different cities, as much as we bid for them, different states, we hire people sometimes on site, obviously. We certainly look to hire those who are part of the union. What can we do working internationally with our union brothers and sisters to see that this is a problem and they begin to put pressure on their own governments?
Well, that's absolutely the case, and that this is, for the IATSE and the people that work in the industry, it's a benefits issue and it's a jobs issue. And for every dollar that is stolen, it's a job in some way, shape, or form. And we need to work with the international community to make them aware that they are stealing health care from our citizens, and they're stealing jobs not just in the United States and Canada, but globally as well, because motion pictures are also made by U.S. companies all over the world. We need to work with all of our trading partners to encourage everyone to protect the intellectual property of every artist and company in the world. This is a benefits issue and a jobs issue.
The time of the gentlelady has expired. Mr. Royce, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how do you incentivize the worst offenders? And China, in all of these reports, is the worst violator of IP protection. How do you ratchet up that pressure on piracy there? You know, being listed as a priority watch country on the special 301 report apparently only goes so far. It hasn't achieved the goal. Ted Fishman's got a book, China Incorporated, that's interesting in its analysis in terms of the organized way in which China has done this. He says China's failure to police intellectual property creates a massive global subsidy worth hundreds of billions of dollars to its businesses. China's vast counterfeiting schemes invade deep into the economies of their victims, expropriating their most valuable assets, and in so doing, undermining their victims' ability to counter. As China grows into a great power, the wealth transferred into the country by stealing intellectual property will propel it forward. So far, pilfering intellectual property has cost China little. It's benefited it tremendously. And he concludes, you know, with this concept. He says, when tackling the issue of intellectual copyright protection, officials from the United States must see their task not simply as a legal issue, but as an exercise in global political power. Is it time for Congress and the United States, and for the administration to form a united front here in terms of using political power on China on this issue?
I'll jump in. Okay. Well, I think there was some attempt to do that with the case against China in the World Trade Organization, and unfortunately it didn't have necessarily the result the United States wanted. I think the other thing we should look at is in the post-war period. You know, we went through this with Japan and with Korea, where they were major counterfeiters and pirates, but because they have developed and have some very big multinationals and very successful, they too are very sensitive to intellectual property today. I think one of the big challenges we may have is to add another dimension to our efforts in engaging China, which is in addition to the enforcement emphasis, to really get in there and try to sensitize not just the government, but other elements of the society about intellectual property.
But they have a different business model, again, going back to the point made in China Incorporated. He says the business model is one where counterfeiters, companies there, usurp foreign technology China desperately needs to meet its industrial goals. The counterfeiters give China, give those companies the means to compete with foreign rivals who are forced to pay full fare for proprietary technology. In other words, your thesis there that we could convince the companies themselves, no, that's their advantage, that's their subsidy.
They were built doing this.
Right.
And it started decades ago with software needed to grow these companies.
So we're going to need a different strategy.
Yeah,
what might that strategy be?
It's wound so tightly into their culture. It's literally a Gordian knot that I don't know how you unwind. And the other problem...
Are we missing something on the WTO enforcement where we go back and use all our force to try to get...
Well, the problem is they can do it if they want. Chinese films don't get pirated in China.
Right.
So clearly, you know, when they want something to stop, they can make it stop. I mean, this is the regime we're dealing with.
So going back to incentivizing them so that they know they have to stop it, do you have a thought on what might do the trick?
I don't know. I think if you're talking about if you get into the area of economic activity, the world is large enough and diverse enough that even if we removed ourselves from certain key areas, there are plenty of other places to go for them to do business.
And so they've wrecked the WTO in a sense. I mean, the very concept behind the World Trade Organization is to have effective rule of law and effective enforcement. Is there a way to reinstitute that so that there's enough pressure collectively to offset exactly what you're discussing?
Well, that's the issue, is how many people can you get to stand behind that idea?
If I may just add, one of the efforts of the anti-counterfeiting trade agreement negotiations that are ongoing, which is a smaller subset of countries, to raise IP enforcement standards is being pursued in a way because you can't pursue it at the WTO. We don't have a critical mass of countries that want to raise standards beyond the current international standard.
Yeah, I think further examination of this issue, Chairman, would be well worthwhile in order to try to figure out a methodology where we might reach that goal of having the WTO effectively enforcing intellectual property.
This may be a good time just to indicate, I was going to do at the end of the hearing, that we are going to hold in Washington, once the special 301 report comes out, a follow-up hearing to bear down on bilateral remedies, technology issues, and the use of our trade representative on this. Hopefully with an IP czar there, as well as the trade representative if one's appointed.
If you just indulge me 10 seconds. Mr. Soderbergh mentioned the Gordian knot of China. I would remind Mr. Soderbergh that how did Alexander the Great untie the Gordian knot? And that's what we have to do. Thank you.
Oops, it's back on the table.
Mr. Schiff is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to just make a couple comments and get your thoughts. One is, I know through the different business models that have been employed, like iTunes, we have increased the legitimate sales on the internet, which is great, and I assume those have brought in new revenue. But I would assume at the same time that piracy has also increased. So it's not that we have taken a chunk out of piracy or diminished piracy necessarily, but we have maybe expanded the pie. So some additional revenues have come in, but the piracy probably has come in even greater, at an even greater rate than legitimate sales. So while I think it's laudable that you're trying to adapt your business models to capture more legitimate revenue, I'm not sure it's really curing the piracy problem. And I'm also a little skeptical of the Google experiment in China for the reason that if the content providers move to a advertising-only revenue model, they may be repeating what's happening in the newspaper industry. It hasn't worked out that well for them to sort of drop subscriptions and paying for content and go to a model where they're completely reliant on advertising revenue. And I would be concerned about moving too much in that direction. I realize in China it's better to get something than nothing, but if it ends up becoming the sort of standard model for the industry, you may find out that you're following in the steps of the newspaper industry. I'm very interested in the French model, and as I understand it, I don't even know if it has gone into effect yet. The challenge I would think we would have legislatively is if we deputize you, and there's nothing I would like better than to deputize you, because I don't think the government can do all this. What form would that take? Would it take the form of providing a legal immunity for those who, after the proper notices, take down a site and therefore may be subject to being sued for taking down the site? So would we be authorizing and therefore, in effect, immunizing the ISPs from doing that? What kind of due process would we need to give if we're going to be, affecting speech, among other things, and potentially barring people's access to the internet? So that would be a second issue. And the final question I have is, won't there be an increasing confluence of interests among the content makers, among the studios, and the recording industry, as well as the pipelines, as the pipelines start to get into the entertainment business with their video on demand and other things? Don't the pipelines now have a greater interest, a greater conflict of interest with you to attack piracy on their own pipeline, because they're offering legitimate content now? So if you could share your thoughts on those questions.
Well, let me just clarify one thing. The graduated response notion that we've been talking about in France is not the law yet. It has not been passed. It's something that's still being debated in France. But I think that to answer one of, I think, your key questions, ISPs for their own purposes now are realizing that their systems are becoming clogged, and that as they become more and more interested in freeing up their systems for legitimate purposes, their interests do become more and more aligned with the content companies, which is part of the reason why I think on the music side we are having some very successful discussions for the first time with them now about implementing some sort of voluntary graduated response system here in the United States.
And I guess it would be our hope that since you're not talking about fining them, you're not talking about hauling them into court, that person then who tries to sue basically for the fact that you've annoyed them and made their life a little more difficult, or at least made it more difficult for them to do this specific thing, is going to make it more palatable that these abilities have been granted, to the people who control the copyright.
And I thought, though, that part of the French model, and I understand that it's not in effect yet, but was individuals who are in the business of uploading stuff and doing it on a massive scale and get the requisite notice or whatnot could be denied the service by the internet provider. And the desire would be not just to block them from access with that provider, but have an agreement among other providers that if you're banned, you can't go to another provider. If that is what France is proposing in part, then you are talking about the prospect of basically blocking people's access to the internet, which is quite a substantial sanction. So I would think, the question would be, what kind of due process would be necessary if you're talking about, potentially blocking access to such now an important tool in all of our lives.
Well, again, I get back to the Target analogy. How many times do you have to catch this guy pulling stuff off your shelf before you say you can't come in here?
I think
just to point out, there's been studies in the UK that simply getting a warning notice, just that in and of itself, has a significant effect on people pirating. Dramatic drop-offs in the UK when they get that warning notice. And what we're talking about in France or in any of these other countries that are discussing it are some sort of graduated warning that ratchets up. It may not be ultimately that you're off for a year. It may be that you're off for a shorter period of time. But there needs to be some sort of rational, reasonable way that ISPs themselves take responsibility and accountability for what happens on their services, on their systems.
The time of the gentleman has expired. I think we're going to forego a second round at this point because we are going to have a subsequent hearing. There are a lot of different areas that have, with some specificity, that both the witnesses and members have discussed, which I think we should be following up on. And I had my own experience with trying to provide a self-help mechanism for intellectual property owners to deal with pirates that drew some controversy in the community, but we're going to take a look at a lot of these things and see what we can do, and particularly in our interventions with representatives of countries that are known in part for the massive amount of piracy that they're countenancing. So with that, I thank all of my colleagues for coming today. I thank really an excellent group of witnesses for being here, and this is an ongoing process, and appreciate very much your taking the time to be with us this morning. And with that, the committee hearing is adjourned.